We are excited to have Kenneth Anderson Taylor with us today. And sorry, Kenny, when we first met with you, you introduced yourself as Kenny, so I'm going to call you Kenny.
Kenny's fine.
Follow your lead. And we're so excited to have you with us today. Kenny's discussion, slides, different slide prompt. Just a reminder that this today's presentation is actually a joint presentation with our Texas Master Naturalist chapter presidents and advisors meeting that we normally have in July, along with our TMN Tuesdays series. So we're combining efforts with this meeting or this session to provide advanced training for all Master Naturalists and our chapter leaders alike. This is part of our TMN Tuesday series, and we offer this the second Tuesday of every month. You can see our list there on the screen of those coming up. Obviously, today is July 14th. Our next one is August 9th. And we'll have more information about the upcoming TMN Tuesdays as they come out. Just a little bit of webinar etiquette. We go through this every time. Please use the chat box to ask questions and keep your chat focused and on topic for the discussion and the presentation at hand. We anticipate this session running up to an hour. Admittedly, sometimes there's this just great discussion and we go over a little bit on the topic. So bear with us if we happen to go over today. And then after we are recording today, so after everything processes, it is our goal to get it posted to our website for the following day. And so you can watch recordings and access resources that are shared today on our website at our TMN Tuesdays link there. And our July speaker, I already mentioned, was Dr. Kenny Taylor. He is the Director of Outreach and Professional Development at the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy at the Texas A&M Bush School. And Kenny will be talking to us today about authentic leadership in public service and how Master Naturalists and chapter leaders can transmit leadership to other members of the team and communities you work with. And we anticipate great discussion today on tips, tricks, and next steps members can take to heighten their own development as a Master Naturalist leader or the development of future leaders within their chapter.
So with that, Kenny, I'm going to pass you the hosting rights, and it's going to stop my screen sharing and give you the option to share your screen now.
Okay. Don't have it yet.
You see the share button on the bottom of the screen?
Yeah, it's trying to connect.
Okay.
It's just spinning right now. Welcome, everyone. So lots of folks from Texas, of course, and even think I saw someone from Oregon. So welcome.
Somebody was logging in from Oregon, is a Texas Master Naturalist, but is enjoying the weather up there.
We're all jealous as we melt here in Texas. This might be the part today where they've asked us to not put so much pressure on the grid.
Yeah, Mary Pearl, it's saying we can't display your shared content. Do I absolutely have permission at this point?
You should, yes, sir. If you need to stop or cancel and then share your screen rather than sharing your content, when you select the share, you should be given the option to share screen at 1 or screen 2 if you have multiple monitors. If not, oh, it's working. Something's working. We're seeing your screen.
All right, and let's see here. Any chance you see my PowerPoint deck?
We do, yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Do
All
you
right,
make it full screen?
I'll get this started. And again, welcome to everyone. Appreciate you being here today. Again, Kenny Taylor. I'm chiming in from College Station, Texas, here at the Bush School. I've been here at the school for about 5 years. And as was mentioned, I serve as an assistant professor here, primarily teaching in the nonprofit management space. And then also a responsibility that I have is as the director of outreach and professional development here within the Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy. Let me just tell you a little bit about, we've got a lot to go through, so I'll just tell you a little bit about who we are. But here at the center, our mission is to support the vibrancy of the nonprofit sector, certainly in the state of Texas and beyond. And what we focus on here is research, professional outreach, which is what I would consider what we're doing today, our outreach out to the variety of nonprofits, again, throughout the state of Texas and in many other different places, and engaged learning. One of the things that we focus on is trying to make sure that our graduate students here have the opportunity to partner, work with, intern, service learning type opportunities with nonprofit organizations to complement their education in a way where it feels engaged, and they also acquire experience. So when they graduate from us, they're hopefully and surely ready for leadership roles within the sector, which we know about 70 to 80% of our graduates go on to absolutely work in the public service space. Our values that we've identified kind of from day one is that, of course, we value nonprofit organizations. We value the opportunity for all. That really kind of speaks to our diversity statement, the opportunity for all to be able to work and participate and lead nonprofit organizations, and the opportunity for all to benefit from the services that nonprofits provide. When we think about the expertise that we have within our center, Dr. William Brown serves as our director, and he certainly has a background in board governance. And my background, as we're going to be talking about today, is in the leadership space. Again, my PhD is in leadership studies. I put my research specifically into studying leadership within nonprofit organizations. It doesn't mean I know it all, but it certainly means that I do have some perspective about nonprofit organizations and what leadership means within, and really thinking about the behavior of leaders. And where I guess some of my research started is who are tomorrow's leaders? What do they look like? Who are they? What behaviors do they have? Things like that. So in terms of our center, I try to provide expertise, if you will, related to leadership specifically within nonprofit organizations. And then back to that word engagement, my responsibility is to ensure that I engage with nonprofit organizations and leaders and focus on developing leaders further, working with emerging leaders, making sure that the vibrancy of the sector is there to the extent that we can contribute to that process, and making sure that they're, again, absolutely prepared to take on some of the challenges and successes that they will experience within the nonprofit sector. As I mentioned, there's a lot to kind of get through today. We've been through the introductions. Just real quick, I have what I would normally do is a best leader exercise that works better in person. Since we're visiting virtually, I'll give you a sense of what that is, but ask you to do that on your own. I'll get into what is authentic leadership, talk about the authentic leadership constructs, provide you with a few questions. I think that's when we'll open it up and hopefully get you to respond to some of that. Provide some perspective, as Michelle mentioned, some tips. How do you excel at your behavior? And really, the crux of today's meeting is really about how we transmit leadership. What does that mean when we transmit leadership? I'll talk about transformational leadership theory as well. When we get to that point, you'll see that just like however many of you all are with us today, there's probably a leadership concept that you believe in. There's a leadership practice that you take on. There's a variety of leadership theories. Today, I'm just going to also highlight transformational leadership as a way to think about what's required of us as leaders. There's a cool little architect called the leadership architecture and the leadership house. So I'll share with you what that looks like and provide a little perspective there. And then personally, I'll get into sharing with you some results from some research that I conducted in 2017, utilizing the Authentic Leadership Questionnaire, and then provide you a sample of the results that came out of that study. And then I'll have, versus a final activity, it'll be more of a final call to action of what you can do once we leave today's sessions. Again, just in terms of thinking about a best leader exercise, what I would do in person. Now, instead of us stopping and going through that, we're not going to do that. But I would certainly encourage you to think about after we get done today. But for right now, think about 3 leaders, or even just one, that you've known personally and you admire them for their exceptional leadership. And what I would ask you to do is, at some point, again, after we get done today, is really think about, take some time, reflect, write down who you're thinking of, and then identify their behaviors that made them exceptional in your eyes. And so when we get into defining what is authentic leadership, and my guess is many of you have heard of this term. There's several definitions. So what I tend to do with a presentation like this is just to give you a variety of definitions, how authentic leadership has been defined over the years. So it's been defined as a calls for leaders, core values to be translated into actions that align with your personal identity. Also, leaders who focus on empowering followers or subordinates or employees. It doesn't even have to be in a work setting. So who do you know, work with, have a relationship with, a family member of, that you empower them, but you're guided by your heart and you have passion and compassion. And then leadership that positively influences followers and their development levels. And again, most of the definitions, when we start talking about, at least certainly the ones that I follow, really have to do from a leadership theory standpoint that have primarily been conceptualized in for-profit or corporate environments. And when I mentioned to you some of the research that I took on, was really trying to think about leadership in a nonprofit setting. So whenever I have the opportunity to be in front of a group like you, it's really important to talk about leadership specifically within the nonprofit space, because there haven't been a lot of research studies within. It's getting better, but we see most of them having take place in the healthcare sector, in the youth development sector, in education, but it's not as widespread as it is within for-profit and corporate environments. So the tool that I use in terms of how I specifically think about authentic leadership and its constructs, they're the 4 that you should see here. And that is self-awareness, transparency, moral and ethical, and balanced processing. So when we think about self-awareness as one construct of authentic leadership, basically what we're saying here is the degree to which a leader is self-aware of his or her strengths, limitations, and how others see you. So I think there's a big difference there. So one way that we utilize this tool, if you will, is we can all self-rate ourselves as leaders using this tool, and many others, but just giving you an example. And then also the other way that you can conduct research studies utilizing the Authentic Leadership Questionnaire is give someone that reports to you to rate you as a leader. And usually what we see are differences there. And primarily, I like to say that that's due to we think about ourselves one way and others see us in other ways. So I always think when we talk about leadership, when we think about how do we get input on leadership, yes, it's great to make sure that you know who you are personally. That's what we're talking about with self-awareness. But we also need to include making sure that we get feedback from others about how they see us as leaders. And from a research standpoint, usually there's some differences there that we can learn from, which is the reason why we want to be aware of what others say about us as well. Transparency, the degree to which a leader reinforces a level of openness in the workplace and with others that provides them with an opportunity to be really forthcoming with their ideas and challenges and opinions. So this one is real easy. I mean, with whoever it is that you work with, think about how open you are to accept when an employee challenges you or shares opinions that are different from yours. Now, that's different for all of us, but one of the things that authentic leadership calls for is utilizing transparency in a way that's beneficial both ways. And then moral ethical. This just really kind of sets the tone of the leader is responsible for setting the standard of whatever environment it is that you're in for the highest moral road and the highest ethical conduct. So you have to be the one that's responsible for this. We'll talk a lot more about one's morals and how ethical we are as leaders. And then balanced processing. This is the one that I really like, that I've certainly personally gotten in trouble with before, especially when I took on my first executive director role at a nonprofit organization. And I finally felt like, okay, I've worked all these years to finally get an executive director role. I'm the one now making all of the decisions at my organization. And what I had a lot of pushback, especially in the public service space, because they wanted to be, my employees at the time wanted to be part of that process. And it's really important for those that have a heart, have passion, that want to serve others, to be part of knowing what's going on, understanding what's in the strategic plan, not just responsible for their daily things that they're responsible for, but what's going on overall at our organizations. And so when I learned about this concept and when I was conducting my research, it really made me reflect personally on, this is something that I need to prioritize for sure, because I had an experience that let me know when I didn't do this, what kind of reaction I got from folks. And if I do this going forward, how beneficial that might be to me personally and ultimately my career. So I guess now might be a good time to open it up, or just even take some responses from you via the chat. But just to get maybe a couple of responses related to the question, public service and nonprofit organizations are often scrutinized for not being well led. Any thoughts there? And if I could just have Michelle or
Yeah, I'll
Mary
watch the chat
Pearl,
for you, Kenny. Sometimes
please.
it takes a little bit for folks to get their fingers moving and get stuff submitted in the chat.
Okay.
So you're asking folks for why there is a perception of public service and nonprofit organizations having poor leadership.
Well, agree or disagree?
Okay. We did get one. Karen mentions there's a higher level of bureaucracy potentially. Becky disagrees and says that sometimes leadership roles are filled by those who have been there for a long time. Oh, that's two different Beckys. One Becky says that she disagrees. The second Becky says that she does agree because of that longevity in those leadership positions. Turnover seems to be a big issue. I'm just going to start reading some randomly here, and I've got a few more. Much is expected of volunteers that are doing the best they can. Vicky disagrees. There's a few more that do agree that it's related to how funds are managed or how to recruit leaders for nonprofits. It's hard to recruit those leaders for nonprofits. And I'm losing them, Michelle, because they're coming in so fast. What are you seeing?
Yeah, they're clicking in right now. So I
Yeah,
saw
Michelle,
one.
just a few more, and we can kind of keep going. But yeah, please share a few more if you don't mind.
One was, I saw one flyby that talked about depends on the ego of the person in charge or the leader, and sometimes how long they've been there. Some people, it varies. So Carla says it varies. Some volunteers may not have experience with a leadership role, though they want to volunteer. Carolyn mentioned a financial model, the ratio of pay of top management to others.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I like this one. Anita says, in this media climate and kind of open social virtual climate that we have, everything and everyone is scrutinized.
Let's stop with that one because that's a really good point. But all of the comments that we received there, again, when I was doing this actual research, again, I'm just want to make sure that I'm being transparent that this was from 2017. Things have surely changed since then. But the point that you just made, as far as nonprofit organizations, the light is on them, and everything happens so fast and we have social media. So nonprofit organizations are really exposed because they're supposed to be the organizations that are doing good. And back when I was looking at this, even though these are some older studies, and of course I have some familiarity with this personally, but just to highlight a few things that we certainly see from a research perspective is that it is pretty consistent that research suggests that nonprofit organizations can overcome wrongdoings by identifying leaders who exhibit integrity and transparency behavior styles. Research also suggests that nonprofit organizations must take into account the behavior of leaders when considering the future of charitable organizations. And I believe that article kind of went into those that stay in business and those that close. The behavior of leaders is highly important when we start talking about who's responsible or ultimately responsible at the variety of nonprofit organizations out there. And then also, research suggests that the perceived ethics of leaders at nonprofit organizations can positively or negatively affect financial support. Now, I did dig a little bit deeper, and when I was going through this process, all it takes is a Google search, and you will see all of the things that have happened over the years that when something happens at a nonprofit organization, whether it be financial mismanagement, I think that we saw that with Wounded Warriors. We saw that with Red Cross when a disaster strikes and people personally give to fight disasters, and then they find out that the money didn't get to people who really truly needed it on the ground, and we saw mismanagement of funds with that particular Red Cross case. It doesn't take much to find where what's going on with the executive leader of a nonprofit organization. And again, I've seen this personally in the organization that I worked for 12 years, dating coworkers, whatever it might be, things like that, that are viewed negatively have this severe impact on nonprofit organizations. Even here in our local community, I won't name the organization, but it wasn't that long ago. The organization went through an executive transition. They hired a new leader. That person mistakenly utilize a credit card for an amount that was over the amount that, in this case, they could buy something for. And the board took action and replaced her. It was in the news. And what we tend to see is that when one nonprofit organization has something bad happen, it affects the entire community of nonprofit organizations. So this is so important, which is the reason why I tend to focus on behavior and what can we do about behavioral things in relation to our leadership, especially at nonprofit organizations and public service organizations, kind of generally speaking. So I won't open it up here, but I'll just pose this question and go into more information about, so how does one excel at their public service role with regard to behavior, and provide some tips there, if you will. So when we get into transmitting leadership, and the one thing that I like to do when we start talking about transmitting leadership is just to really kind of have you think about and reflect on, and this is just in the name of, I know you've heard this before, but just so that you hear it from someone else, is to think about whether it be yourself or someone that you know. One day you walk in the office and you're friendly. The next day you walk in the office and something happened at home and you brought that with you and you're not so friendly. So when we transmit leadership, one of the things, even with all of these behaviors and actions that are listed, one of the things that we have to be cognizant of as leaders is to make sure that we're consistently transmitting leadership in a certain way. And that consistency leads to, what narrative do I have? So I tend to ask myself, what narrative have I built up in my place of employment? Do they know Kenny as the same Kenny from day to day to day to day to week to months to years, versus you never know which one you're going to get when he walks through the door. And so when we talk about how do we transmit leadership, this is something intentional. This is something strategic that we might not think about every day. We might do them kind of organically or naturally, but something that we really have to think about. When I walk through the door, I'm going to be directive today. When I walk through the door, I'm going to participate with my team. When I walk through the door, I'm going to stop by offices, say hello, ask how people are doing that are on my team, so that they know that of me. And sometimes, again, I know we all naturally do things like that, but can we say over a period of time, this is something that we're absolutely consistent with, so that we're great at transmitting leadership and we have built our narrative around these things. So challenging, inspiring, being ethical, being one that's known to develop others. How do we message things at our organizations? Is our messaging consistent, or is it all over the place? Again, something else that you will be known for if you say one thing one day and another thing the next. Those are all behavioral type actions and ways that we transmit leadership, whether it be in our place of work, at our home, volunteer opportunities that we take on outside of work, in our local communities. So there's a variety of ways that we can take this on, as far as also how we transmit leadership. And so today, of course, we're talking about being authentic. So treating others equally, being inclusive, not having or being known as one who has a hidden agenda where you don't share information with others. And one of the things that I tend to come across that, it's for me, it's been hard to get in the habit of, because we work, 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 work. When do we stop as leaders and take time to reflect on, this is what happened today in the workplace? I'm going to think about that. And, am I going to write down what would I do different next time that situation happens? Am I just spending time reflecting, knowing what I would do next time, identifying what are the options I have for next time that this comes up, and what is the outcome that I want to see happen the next time around, and keeping that in my back pocket is something that, as an authentic leader, I thought about it. I know what I would do next time. I know what those options are. I can't wait for that to happen again, because I'm going to handle that better. Transformational leadership. This is one where, or is defined as, showing concern for others, leading by example, being knowledgeable, having an energetic approach, being passionate about the work that we do. Transformational leadership in many areas is defined as one that's responsible for motivating, and one that's responsible for inspiring others around the work that has to get done or needs to get done. And then situational leadership is another area that I really enjoy talking about, and that we've also built some trainings around. But whether it be authentic, transformational, or situational, situational is important as a management tool, is the way that it's described. And the details are providing specific instruction to folks. You know when you have to do that as a leader, because you know where they are as an employee from a development standpoint. So, you know, when you hire a new employee or you have someone that comes into your organization who's new, they might be extremely motivated, but they might not know exactly what to do because they have a lower level of competency with regard to what's going on at your particular organization. So at that point, when they come through your organization and they're new, they're motivated, they're excited, but at the same time, their competency levels are low. So you have to provide them detailed instruction. Um, Situational leadership also involves you making sure that you have information that you need about where folks are at on the continuum, if you will, of how competent they are. So you seek input to know who people are so that you know what you need to do as a leader. It depends on the situation. And then praising and giving feedback, um, telling people, letting them know that they're doing a great job. Keep doing what you're doing. The idea with situational leadership is to get them to the point to where they come in with a low level of competency and you get them to a high level of competency. And then you also have a high level of trust to where you can let them go and shine in the work that they're doing. And that speaks to the last point here with instilling confidence in folks is where you want to get to so that you can let them fly on their own, if you will, in terms of developing professionally. So I'm going to use or point out, just like I mentioned, if I back up here, the variety of different nonprofit theories that are out there, the variety of leadership concepts that are out there. I'm talking to professionals. I know that leadership is really popular these days. So I'm guessing that all of you all have a leadership style, have read a leadership book, have seen plenty of articles on leadership. I guess what I wanted to mention here is whether it be authentic or transformational or situational, I'm going to just utilize transformational as to help us through today as one way to think about um, how we or how you can utilize any leadership theory or style that you want to, but also to confirm how important it is to always utilize that with an authentic foundation. And so when we talk about the constructs for transformational leadership, the easy way to remember it, at least when I was going through school, was the 4 I's. And the 4 I's are uh, giving individualized consideration, uh, intellectual stimulation, idealized influence, and inspirational motivation. I think I mentioned that one a little earlier as a construct. As a transformational leadership, a leader, you're responsible for inspiring and motivating others. But we'll talk in more detail about all of these constructs. So with individualized consideration, kind of as it alludes to, you're providing a supportive climate in which you as a leader listen carefully to the individual needs of your employees. You know what's going on with your employees. You know, certainly there's some balance there, but you know when your employees are going through things, whether it be something at home, something they're frustrated with at work, not getting along with a coworker. There's all sorts of things, but you really have to, as a transformational leader, prioritize this, your concern for individuals. Intellectual stimulation. I mean, here it's the leaders that stimulate employees to be creative and innovative and to challenge their own beliefs and values as well as those of the leader and the organization. And so what we know from research is employees want to work in a variety of places for leaders for a variety of reasons. And just like we started with someone who is considerate to them. Some folks walk through the door and they don't care if you're considerate, but they want to work for someone that stimulates their intellect, that they want to be in an environment where they're learning. They want to be in an environment where they're challenged to do creative things and to figure out hard things. Idealized influence. This gets into these are leaders who act as strong role models for followers. And I know you've all seen this, but folks that you've worked with, you set the tone where folks want to emulate you, if you will. And then again, we talked about this one with the inspirational motivation, that your responsibility here is communication at your organization. And through your communication, inspiring those to become even more committed and part of that shared vision of the organization. So versus when I mentioned a little earlier with the balanced processing construct, to where I was making decisions on my own. What I should have been doing is communicating the decisions that I felt like as the leader of my organization were highly important, and see if through my communication that I could motivate them to share in that same vision to push our mission further down the road. So when I talked about the, I call this the leadership house. And so kind of back to the point of that authentic leadership foundation. So this one kind of describes what we just talked through. And so if you think about a house, and you think about the four constructs, those are the four outer pillars of this particular house. And if you set being authentic as your foundation, you're being transparent, you know who you are, you're engaging others in decision-making processes. And when they look at you, they look at you as someone who is highly ethical, because that's what your behavior exhibits. And as we see the four walls up from the foundation, here we utilize the constructs of transformational leadership. But there is where you can build your walls with the constructs of situational leadership, or any other leadership theory or behavior that you prescribe to. That's what you build your walls with. And so what this wants to portray is you have your authentic leadership or your authentic foundation. You always want to build your house there. Utilize whatever leadership theory that you prescribe to build your walls. And until you do that, there's no way to be strategic without going about building what you're trying to build at your organization until you do these things first, is what this is looking to portray. Again, authentic foundation, build your walls with transformational leadership or situational leadership. And then once you do that, then you know that you can broadcast out further, which is our responsibility as public servants and executives at nonprofit organizations, to take what we do internally and serve as many people as we can, or broaden, expand, advance our mission to the highest extent that we can, safely and also in a quality way. So just to kind of get back into the research, some research from a study again from 2017 that I conducted. And since we've been talking about specifically authentic leadership, so my research had to do with identifying a leader's use of the authentic leadership constructs, and what relationship that had with job satisfaction at nonprofit organizations. And so one of the things that was happening to me, of course, you know, you have to personalize your own research and things that you're into to get through a process like this, at least for me it was, is what was personal to me. And one of the things that I saw within the organization that I worked for 12 years, if I haven't mentioned, is Big Brothers, Big Sisters. I know there's several Big Brothers, Big Sisters in all of the areas, or many of the areas that I saw you all chiming in from. But one of the things that we used to see as an organization is lots of turnover. And so one of the things that I was interested in, kind of back to who are tomorrow's leaders, who would thrive at a job like this, who would thrive more generally speaking at nonprofit organizations. How do you get people to stay longer at nonprofit organizations. We talked a little bit earlier about, we know from research that pay is a huge deal within the nonprofit sector. I tend to put, there's three buckets of nonprofit employees. And those three buckets for me were, there's some that would never work in the industry because they never felt like they would get enough pay or have the opportunities for promotion, or just they didn't feel like they could make a career working in the nonprofits, kind of based on pay alone on some level. So you have a third of people who would never do this type of work. And then you have a third of people that just end up in the nonprofit sector, because here in the state of Texas, 1 of every 8 jobs is a nonprofit job in the United States. This is from fairly recent research. 1 of every 10 jobs across the United States is in the nonprofit sector. So what I like to say is some people just end up in the industry without any passion or love for serving others or for working in a mission-based environment. So some people just kind of end up in the industry. And then the other third of people is, back to the reason or the reason why I really love being a part of the Bush School here, working in the nonprofit management discipline. Then the other third are people that they educated themselves, they went to school for, they're preparing themselves for a career in the nonprofit space. When I first started working for nonprofits in the early 1990s, I didn't see hardly anyone that looked like me. And all of my guy friends were working at corporate jobs, and they often wondered, why did I do that and things like that. But I myself was someone who from day one wanted to work in nonprofit organizations. And I won't get into those details, but I mentioned to you that I worked for Big Brothers Big Sisters for 12 years. The primary reason there was I grew up without my father. And when I found Big Brothers Big Sisters, I was like, oh, this organization serves kids that grew up like me. And so I had this passion to really work in the industry, to work at a youth serving organization that helped to prevent stuff like that. And it just stuck. And that's what led to those 12 years. So again, when we think about who's in the nonprofit space, people that absolutely won't work in it, people that just end up in it, and then the people that absolutely desire to work in it. So that kind of frames this research that I'm going to go through with you now.
Kenny,
So,
I have a quick question. There's a
yeah,
lot of
please,
chat happening right now.
of course.
As you look at your research from the perspective of paid employees managing these nonprofits, our master naturalists are coming to this and looking at it from a volunteer leadership perspective. They're volunteering to be leaders and volunteering to be team members of these nonprofit organizations. How do you see that translate with the three, and I wrote it down, the 4 authentic leadership styles and pillars, and how does that translate?
I think the same thing applies. I mean, if you are a volunteer at an organization, some of the organizations that I looked at were volunteer led in my research as well too. And so when I had a scenario where there was a person who was a volunteer leading an organization and responsible for leading others, basically the same rules apply. As a matter of fact, we thought even more so due to the fact that that volunteer was responsible for a mission. And in the case where you're responsible for leading others, in every case, the information that I have presented so far, the same rules apply, but even more so with regard to volunteers taking on a role like this. And then, so even a little bit further, so when we think about volunteers, I've thought about this from a board standpoint as well. Um, Board members need to take on the same thing, and they're volunteers in terms of supervising executives at organizations. When you're a volunteer at nonprofits, again, there's not anything, I feel confident that there's not anything that I've represented today that doesn't apply just as much.
I agree. Thank you.
Sure. So just real quick, I know we're getting there. For everyone who's joining us today, I'm fine on time, but we are going to get through this because I can blow through this pretty quick. But so when I was asking the question of identifying behavioral styles, utilizing the authentic leadership questionnaire and the relationship that it has with job satisfaction, there's several ways that you can measure job satisfaction at organizations. And so what you see on the left where it says satisfaction with supervision, I won't go through all of those details, but I'll provide some perspective there. The graph that you're looking at here says, and back to a comment that I mentioned a little earlier, I rated leaders that the ratings that I received were from employees of leaders. And so this graph here, as the ones to follow, this represents that the higher employees rated leaders' transparency behavior style. So you as a leader utilizing transparency as a behavior style, they were also rated higher on satisfaction with supervision. And so the tool that I use is what's called a job description index or job descriptive index, the JDI. And the JDI can measure job satisfaction in a variety of ways. So when it says satisfaction with supervision here, that basically alludes to the person that I report to, whether paid or volunteer. If they're transparent, I have a higher level of satisfaction with the type of supervision that I receive on the job. So same thing here, whether a paid employee or volunteer, the higher that employees rated leaders on self-awareness, utilizing that behavior style, the higher they were also rated on satisfaction with supervision. So self-awareness and transparency so far leads to a higher level of satisfaction with the one-on-one type of supervision that you receive. So all of you all that are, again, coming from the volunteer perspective, what my research is saying, if you utilize self-awareness as a behavior, if you utilize transparency as a behavior, a leader behavior, whoever it is that you're working with, you can be pretty confident that that person has satisfaction with you as a supervisor. So same thing with one with high morals and high ethical standards. So again, the higher on moral ethical, the higher on satisfaction with supervision. Now this one gets a little different. So again, one way you can measure is the satisfaction with direct supervision. Another way from that job descriptive index that you can measure satisfaction on jobs or your satisfaction with your job is the satisfaction with work on present job. And so here, self-awareness came up as something that was relevant, if you will. So the higher that employees rated leaders on self-awareness, the more satisfied folks were with their work on present job. And what work on present job alludes to is those basic routine things that people have to do as leaders every day. The paperwork, the jumping on the computer to respond to emails, whatever those things are for your particular subsector, as far as what you do on a daily basis. Sometimes that stuff gets boring. But if they work for a leader that's self-aware, that they believe to be self-aware, doing those routine, mundane things aren't so bad. So this one gets into, just to give some description here, so satisfaction with job in general. So you can go through to rate job satisfaction in a way to where you ask, are you okay with the supervision that you receive? Are you okay with those routine responsibilities? I mentioned pay a little earlier. Pay is also in this too. Are you satisfied with your pay? Another construct is, are you satisfied with the people that you work with? This one here, the satisfaction that you have with your job in general, is really what we call a global rating. If I were to ask you in general, are you satisfied with your job? And employees that rated leaders high on transparency in general seem to be satisfied with their job. So I provided what's called the Leadership Development Blueprint as an attachment over to Michelle and Mary Pearl. Of everything that we went through today, basically in the back of that, I would encourage you to read the entire document. But in the back of that, there are 14 questions. And those questions are things that you should know about yourself. One of the questions that I like in there, just for example purposes, is when you make a hard decision, whether paid employee or volunteer, when you make a hard decision in your place of employment, are you still, or do you feel still like you're respected at the workplace, or was that hard for you? Do you do that? Did you need to do it and you didn't? But when you do you still feel like you are accepted and respected at your place of employment? There's a variety of those questions. Again, it's 14 of them. And then I would encourage, like I always do, for anyone who, especially in the public service and the nonprofit space, always continue to reassess where you are personally. Many times, you don't know where to go when you lead or run an organization, again, paid or volunteer. You're not sure where to go for professional development. But one of the things we all can absolutely do is reflect, like I mentioned a little earlier, and assess where we are professionally and developmentally with regard to how we go about our leadership process. Put in a brief plug for anyone who isn't aware of, we have 3 different nonprofit certificates here that we run from our center. And that's a general nonprofit leadership certificate, certificate in social justice that speaks to our diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts, and then a new certificate in fundraising leadership. These are all continuing, non-credit, professional-based certificates, and we have a variety of nonprofit leaders come into those from across the state and in different states as well. And then we also have our leadership and public service program that's going to go live on the 3rd and 4th of August next month. That's in person here. So those are the 2 plugs I wanted to give you, since I had you as a captive audience. And I think I'm through. So looks like we have a few minutes for the presentation portion. And then I think we can open it up and maybe take any questions or feedback or whatever else we want to get into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll second your plug, Kenny. I got my certificate from the Bush School in public management, and then also took that leadership and public service course 3 years ago now. And really enjoyed the opportunity to get to interact with all of the different faculty and staff that were brought in from the Bush School. Some fantastic resources for folks that are wanting to dive deeper.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of stuff happening in chat, and a lot of discussions. And I did want to point out that the article that you referenced is on our website, as well as your slide deck today. That's already on our TMN Tuesday website, where folks registered to attend for today. So they should be able to get those 14 questions and that full article there.
Yeah, so now that I'm not kind of focusing on the presentation again, I have plenty of time. I know we're on a time limit, but I'll kind of get into, I see a couple of things. One, looks like Karen talked about differences between men and women's leadership styles. The research hasn't found many differences between men and women in terms of who's better. It's actually mixed from a research standpoint, as far as who's better at leadership. I know that's probably an age-old argument, but we haven't found many differences there in terms of styles. The way that we talk about it from I guess a scholarly level is that there's feminine traits and male traits, and we all take on a variety of traits when it comes to leadership. And what happens is we've looked at things like, certain people with certain levels of education want a certain style, if you will. Usually that's based around Are you someone that's known as a leader that's focused on the task that need to get done, or are you someone as a leader that's more has a concern for people or more considerate, which was one of the behavior things that we talked about a little earlier. Recommendation on coaching for nonprofit executive directors. I mean, I would go back to, I understand completely, especially if volunteers, that can be a lonely role. And where do you get coaching from? Who do you go to? Anytime you serve as a leader or executive for a nonprofit organization, it's a lonely space. So other executives in your community, there's usually your foundations in town. Sometimes they have folks that are local to you that sometimes they provide resources for local executives, not just in having funding from them, but folks that they have as coaches that can help out local nonprofit organizations. And then, of course, one of the things that, like I mentioned, the opportunities, the professional opportunities that we have here. There are a variety of centers that have resources like what we do. But the reality is when it comes to leadership is, we all have to invest in that personally, even if our employers don't. And I'm not sure what the situation is for volunteers. You all are providing, opportunities like this. That's great. But anyone who's looking to progress professionally at some point, it's also a personal investment as well too, and just find the best thing that you feel like would work for you and go for it. I would recommend, that's for sure.
Hey Kenny, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some more stuff coming in chat, but something Michelle and I were actually discussing as we were getting ready for today's workshop. We have, and especially in, I don't know if this research exists yet or not, but we have seen in the last 3 years, 2 years of living in, of COVID and virtual and hybrid interaction of our chapters and our volunteer boards. We've seen a different level of interaction and a different potential for recruitment of volunteer leaders to the boards as their job duties have changed with this new kind of hybrid distance, some virtual and some back to in-person environments. Have you seen or are there ways that our volunteers can look at differing their recruitment and development tools for bringing new leaders on as positions are in this flux with how we are engaging with each other right now?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. I'll take what you said and maybe spin it just a little bit. What I would say is now is the opportunity for organizations to think about whether coming out of the crisis or wherever anyone is at individually with that, is how do you think about performance? And now what's important for you as an organization in terms of who you're looking to recruit to be on a board or take on a leadership role or whatever it might be. I mean, my guess is that's changed tremendously as in terms of what type of performance you have to have going forward for what everybody's been through. And if you look at what's important now from a performance standpoint, what's important for us to accomplish now as an organization. And if you can, again, if you can conceptualize what those things are, and then as you go out to talk to people, I would go back to transparency. Here's what we've been through. Here's what we need to address now. Here's how we need to perform now. I mean, I've visited with many organizations that, some of them were on the verge of going out of business, and many of them did. So what's important now, and have open, transparent conversations with volunteers, folks that you're trying to bring into your organizations, and see how they respond. So yes, there's things we need to change, but I would say maybe more focus on here's the things that we need to accomplish now. And now we don't need these type of people that we recruited in the past. Now we need this, and see how folks respond. And I think I feel like that's an easier route to identifying what your organization is going through and has to accomplish, and complementing that with who you're trying to get to help serve your organization.
Yeah, it's a great way to think about it, because the skill sets and the job descriptions of leaders in our chapters is changing, from how an in-person chapter operated to how these new hybrid and virtual shifting chapters and programs are operating.
Hmm.
Great. Michelle, are you seeing other questions that we can ask and pose to Kenny here?
It's one question up further, when Kenny was talking about the survey, the survey research that you presented, and someone mentioned authentic survey, and I can't remember if that was a term you mentioned, or if you have resources that maybe our chapters and members could put into practice, using a survey such as that to survey our membership.
Yes.
Chapter
Yeah.
membership.
Yeah, absolutely. That particular tool that I've used and that I'm a little bit more familiar with is the Authentic Leadership Questionnaire. And the good part about that one is it's short. It's like 16 questions. And so the Authentic Leadership Questionnaire, you can surely find that online. It's 16 questions, and those 16 questions, I think 4 P's kind of respond to the ratings for being self-aware, utilizing morals and ethics, being transparent, and balanced processing. And then, of course, you just kind of have to run the data but the good part is it's a simple enough tool to utilize in almost any space. And again, when you find that tool, there's a self-rating that you can do yourself as a leader, or you can give it to others to fill out on your behalf to see what folks think about you. And that's kind of the route that I recommend more than the self-rating, because I think you get just better information from
A
having someone
360.
rate you as a leader. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's lots of discussion in the chat. I'm having a hard time picking out questions. There's lots of great discussion.
I have one that came in, and we are rolling out of that right at that 1 o'clock hour. So if you don't mind, Michelle, I've got one that came in from Sharon Hamilton, or two that actually came in from, no, it's just one. In a volunteer organization, what strategies would you use to motivate individuals who do not share the leader's vision for the organization, or who refuse to change their way?
Yeah. So with that one, I mean, I really go to I would put that back to that person. Are you truly engaging and they're part of that process with you? And if they are indeed part of that process with you, where you're talking about it together, making decisions together to the extent that you can, you've discussed it, even if you make, as the leader, make a different decision than what they say recommended. If you're going through that process of engaging them to come to a decision, the honest answer is there's not a lot more that you can do. I mean, your responsibility as the leader is to make sure that they go through that process with you. And if you can find consensus, great. If you know as the leader that you have to make a different decision, usually the way that it goes is that narrative. I'll get back what we talked about a little earlier, where at the end of the day they can say, well, at least we were part of the process, even though that's not the answer that we wanted. If you do that, I believe that that's all that you can do. And so in my career professionally, when I moved to that, and then those folks still weren't believers or passionate, that's when we started to have conversations about moving on to what they can find some passion around, or maybe they don't need to be part of the mission that we have here. I'm not sure that there's a whole lot else that you can do with that.
Great. Sometimes it is in those tough moments where the leader has to recognize that that there are things that can be done and things that need to be done to move forward.
Yeah, and I'm just real quick. I mean, I wanted to make sure to acknowledge because it's just one that I see here. I know there's a lot in the chat, but Karen, you mentioned. I think I mentioned a little earlier. Who's better at leadership, and she added some specificity there. But as a female working with men that completely rejected you as their supervisor, I mean, that's a tough one. As a leader, I guess, all that I can really say there is, we sometimes have environments like that. But what I would go back to is just, read up, study up on as much as you can from a leadership standpoint. Again, there's, from research standpoint, we don't see a lot of differences in men and women in terms of who's better, but at the same time, looking at different strategies. And for me, it's, can you prove yourself to be authentic with them? And I'm not saying that that's a responsibility that you have, but if you go out of your way as a leader to engage them in things that are going on, I hate to go straight to, sometimes there's just tough decisions that have to be made. But if you're going out of your way to work with those folks and you're just not getting anywhere, I imagine that that's a tough environment, and quite honestly, whether it's that dynamic, racial, cultural dynamics, we see some of that where as well. I mean, sometimes there's just tough situations that we get in, and just look for as many resources as you can. I'm not sure that I absolutely have an answer for you today, but do what you can so that you feel good as a leader, that you tried a variety of things to get there. And then if that doesn't work, then it just represents a tough situation to be in.
Absolutely. Well, Kenny, we're rounding out that hour mark, and I don't want to hold you much longer, but really appreciate your time today. We've got a lot of great kudos coming in the chat, and folks really appreciated this topic today. So wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity to get to hear from you and from all the great work that's happening at the Bush School. I really appreciate it personally as a connection. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for supporting our programs. And again, I see the chats as well too. Thank you for all your comments. I appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure to join you. And maybe we'll see you down the road.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Kenny.
All right, good to see you.
Thank you.
All right, bye.